Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week we look at the most overlooked movies and actors in this year's Oscar nominations. We also review two Best Picture contenders, The Imitation Game and Selma, plus new releases The Wedding Ringer and Paddington, plus two films recently released on home media, The Congress, starring Robin Wright, and Kevin Smith's Tusk. Our triple feature of older films is new classic Warm Bodies, Joe's pick for Guilty Pleasure Month, Half Past Dead, and Richard Dreyfuss in a 1974 Oscar nominee, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. Let's get right into gear here with The Imitation Game. And this is, like I just mentioned, up for Best Picture among many other awards. And Justin's going to tell us about that.
Desperate to win World War II, the British government recruits Alan Turing, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, to form a team able to crack the seemingly unbreakable code Enigma being used by the German military. However, as the team starts to encounter massive breakthroughs with the help of their associate Joan Clark, played by Keira Knightley, they find themselves making life-or-death decisions, influencing the ultimate outcome of the war. The Imitation Game is such an intense and powerful story. I'm honestly surprised that it took this long for a movie based on this matter to actually come to fruition. Benedict Cumberbatch absolutely gives it his all, giving us a character so devoted and yet so torn apart from everything associated with this. And he plays off Keira Knightley beautifully, having this great platonic relationship, but also adding in a lot more depth. Twists and turns abound, but yet one thing that I really liked about this movie was it has some surprising wit at times to balance out the drama. It's a great film. It's absolutely worthy of the nominations that it received. My only real issue is I think there may be a few too many flashbacks cross-cutting into Turing's past. But overall, very satisfied with this movie. I give it an A.
This really is just a classical-looking film, you know, from the golden age of cinema, honestly. It focuses 100% on story and characters. There's no fluff, there's no extra, there's no CGI. The acting and directing is incredible. I was honestly having a really bad day when I went to see this. This movie took my mind off of it completely. I was so into this. It's very riveting, and it's not the kind of subject matter you'd think would be. It's one of these movies where, you know, if you told somebody the synopsis, they would be like, yeah, like Moneyball. They would just, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
He made a computer. You know, well, he kind of made the first computer and it saved the war, and, you know. It's just a fantastic movie. I have only one complaint with it, and that is that the final scene is a little too Oscar baity. It really seemed like they were pushing for those nominations, but I have to say, this is an A-plus film. I loved it. Joe?
Well, big surprise. I'm pretty much just going to echo you guys. I think it's a really fascinating movie. Just a great story. And I like what you said, it harkens back to kind of the classical style film. Not a lot of fluff, not a lot of flashy explosions or tricks, just plot, characters. And you've got great actors to really excel it. I think Cumberbatch is excellent here. I think it's easily one of the best performances I've ever seen him give. He's definitely playing off the kind of quirkiness of his Sherlock character, but taking it a different direction, a little more likable, I think. And I agree with what Justin said, too. One thing that really surprised me is that it's a very serious movie for the most part, but there were a lot of lighter moments, a lot of really smart, fun, believable humor in a lot of these situations that were interjected. The only real negative I thought that I did feel like the end scene was trying a little too hard, and I thought that there were some elements of his life that weren't really touched on quite enough. Like they wanted to try and focus on the whole concept of him kind of being an outsider and a loner, as well as his struggle to build the machine and his relationship with the other people, and also his homosexuality. I felt like they didn't quite cover all of it. It wasn't quite as balanced as it could have been, but it was still really, really, really close. I mean, overall, performances were great. Really, there wasn't really much wrong with this movie. I would give it an A.
Couple of tweaks maybe for that A+ for you guys.
Just a little
bit. Like
couple scenes, couple little things. I agree. Flashbacks, where it wasn't so much. I didn't mind the flashbacks.
Yeah, I didn't mind the flashbacks,
but
they have their place. I just don't think we needed as many.
I don't know if it's the number, but the way they interjected the flashbacks was confusing sometimes, because they wouldn't go immediately and give you enough time to prepare to go into the next scene. It would literally be like, okay, we're in another time period now, and it might take you a second to adjust. They didn't transition very well. It was always sudden. I mean, you figured it out pretty quickly, obviously, but there's multiple timelines, and sometimes they go back to the furthest timeline, and I would kind of wonder why we're talking about that, because I'm more interested in another part. So maybe it wasn't quite organized quite as well as it could have been, but...
maybe a little bit of the same problem Wild had.
Actually, very similar. Though I think that they were utilized better here than
I agree.
Wild. So.
I thought the flashbacks were an important part, so we got a more clear vision of this character. But Cumberbatch just does an incredible job. And I agree with you, Joe. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything where he's quite this good.
No.
You know, he's one of these guys that's been, you know, sort of an it guy for a couple of years. And then, you know, I don't know. What was his mainstream breakout in film? Was it Khan? I mean, he was already in Sherlock, but in film, what was it?
That's probably the first big thing.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, but...
I would not argue that, because nobody really saw that.
Nobody did, but they did... But critics definitely did recognize Cumberbatch.
I mean, on a wide scale, though.
On his, I guess Khan would probably be his breakthrough role, but obviously he kind of did, you know, August Osage County, and he kind of expanded.
Yeah, which he was great in that as well.
You know, he's been expanding, and then of course another big role he was Smaug, so you know there's that too. So
some voice work also.
So he's kind of hit the ground running, and now he's going for he can hit both sides. He can do popular stuff, and he can hit for the more grounded, grittier films. But he's well balanced. I mean, I always knew he had talent. It's just that he really hasn't had that role where he's been center stage and really shined, you know, showed how dynamic he can be. But I will admit, like I said, I do sense a bit of the Sherlock element there. Very similar in some ways, but a little more likable, I would say.
Well, and I think I liked these movies a little bit more than both of you, but Begin Again and Laggies, you know, I love Keira Knightley. I'm glad she's back to being British in this movie.
Thank goodness.
You know, Begin Again, Joe and I both liked. You know, Laggies, I was sort of alone in that. But I don't know, just something about... She's just such a classically, you know, Jane Austen-y kind of British actress. It is a little bit off-putting sometimes to see her try to go American, yeah.
I mean,
I'm with you on that one, Dan.
It's okay.
It's not an easy transition.
It's better, you know, when you're natural with your own element, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, you don't have to fight the accent with each scene. So there you go.
Yeah.
I thought she was pretty good in this too.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's up for supporting actress here, which I think is deserved, as well as him and the many other nominations that it got. So, speaking of which, we transition now into our next movie, and that is Selma. This is another movie up for Best Picture this year. Directed and co-written by Ava DuVernay. Selma is a biographical drama film about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and specifically his struggle to obtain voting rights for all blacks and his organization of marches from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama in protest. Dr. King is played by David Oyelowo. Tom Wilkinson co-stars as President Johnson. Carmen Ejogo as Dr. King's wife Coretta, and Common, Tim Roth, and Oprah Winfrey have roles as well. There's been a lot of chatter surrounding this movie and its surprising lack of Oscar nominations, especially since it is a film with nearly universal acclaim. It secured only 2, Best Picture and Best Original Song. And of course, we're going to get to our own lists of Oscar's most overlooked films later on in the show with our top 5, but I do think the love for this movie is justified. First of all, Oyelowo is unbelievable in this role. To play an iconic figure from the 20th century whose look, voice, and mannerisms are familiar to pretty much everyone is not an easy task to tackle, and to do it with the precision and command that Oyelowo has is something I have very rarely seen. So maybe spoilers for my top 5 coming up there. But I also applaud DuVernay for focusing in on one aspect of Dr. King's life. Really, it's just a few months. There is more than enough meaty story here to cover, and to focus on more would have been a disservice. Everybody knows about I Have a Dream, the assassination, but the Selma movement is something that, unless you were alive at the time, most probably know little about. Now, I do think DuVernay's directing lacks a little pizzazz, and at some point seems to miss the purpose of the scene. So I don't necessarily think her omission from the Oscar list was a major offense. And also, Winfrey's character seems incredibly superfluous. Sort of a, hey, look, it's Oprah every, 3 or 4 scenes, which is another issue with the directing.
A little annoying.
And speaking of which, there's just too many characters in general that we simply don't get to know. With that in mind, I wouldn't say it's one of the best pictures of 2014, but it is, without a doubt, to me, the most important. I give it an A. Joe?
Well, I did not know that Olio was not nominated for Best Actor.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
kind of surprising, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that. I looked over the list briefly, actually, but wow, I missed that. At least it got the Best Picture nomination.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I think it's a very important picture. I definitely don't think it's one of the best, though. The best thing about it, though, is his performance. Mm-hmm. I mean, to get somebody to actually play such an iconic individual, especially in America, and do it that well, it's almost like a copy. I mean, what a craft. I've never heard of this guy before, but he's going to be big.
And he's British, by the way, speaking of accents. He nails this role.
See, and I didn't know that either. Mm-hmm. So, it really, by and large, his just enrapting with this role, becoming this person, it's a testament to great acting, I think. I really applaud him for that. I also think the supporting cast is really good, too. I think that some of the directing is good. I think there are some good shots. I think they definitely did well with the costumes and the sets to kind of get you involved with the 60s. You definitely feel like you're there. So atmospherically, I think it's done pretty well. I do feel, though, that in terms of films about civil rights, I feel like this one is pretty by the numbers. I've seen many other movies cover the same subject matter, honestly, better. I can't deny that. There are definitely some very positive things here. I agree. So many characters, don't really know any of them, and that kind of impacts some of the scenes that are supposed to have more intensity. It kind of feels like it's resolved a little too quickly, and when there's supposed to be this big struggle, especially even for the Selma movement, I felt like it was a little bit underplayed. So I feel like this one didn't quite get into the meat of the story as well as other ones have been. Like, all the time I was watching it, unfortunately, and he does show up in the movie, I was thinking of Malcolm X, which is a much superior movie, I have to say, just by comparison. But to be fair, that movie was longer and focused on the man's whole life. So maybe that's a little unfair. But even so, didn't like it quite as much as you did. I give it an A-. There's a lot of really good stuff here, but it's not quite fleshed out, not quite balanced, and I've seen this subject tackled better before.
Okay.
There's good drama, but certain things like the constant Oprah's character Oprah Winfrey's character is completely useless. Yeah. Could have used the 5 minutes we had with her throughout the movie for something else.
Right.
Cuba Gooding Jr., interesting person, has 2 scenes in the movie. It's like some people just show up and it's just like it's just unfortunate.
Well, I will say, of all of the movies on the show this week, we're tackling 9 different movies. This was the hardest grade for me because I was between A- and A, and I just thought for the sheer importance of this film and for Oyelowo's performance itself, I bumped it up to that A. Justin, what do you think of Selma?
Director Duvernay has a ton of potential, but I honestly wish her directing style wasn't so loaded. I feel like the constant close-ups of atrocities, constant focus of the horrible white protesters, we're on your side. You don't need to prove it. And the controversy with Lyndon B. Johnson's portrayal is completely warranted. I'm sorry, you made a pretty big mistake.
Could you elaborate on that? I must have missed something.
In Selma, Duvernay takes a stance that Lyndon B. Johnson was completely against it. It is a blatant historical mistake. Historians have openly called her out on that.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't mean to interject, but
sorry,
that is a stance they kind of go with Wilkinson, who does a great job, by the way.
Yes, he does.
Blew Lee Shriver out of the water. But Lyndon B. Johnson is the most important president for the civil rights movement. He, it would not have gone through without him. Really, I mean, Kennedy played a big part, but LBJ was a big supporter of it. It was complicated. He wasn't a perfect man, of course. Nobody is, but he was basically the civil rights guy.
And it's a pity because Selma is this really, really powerful story with a lot of good things going on with it. Oyelowo is great. I still am not entirely sure if he brought it as much as he should have. I feel like the event kind of overshadows all the performances because it goes on for so long and there's so many different parts.
Well, I would argue that I don't think that they delve too much into his character.
That's another big issue. But I mean, there are solid performances. But ultimately, like I said, I feel like they're just honestly standing in the epic march itself, which by the end of the film just feels kind of anticlimactic. It's a good film, and I definitely understand where they're going with the nominations for Best Picture and Best Song, but it's just nowhere near as good as it should be. I give it a B+.
Nice.
Well, I don't think that it's necessarily a movie about Martin Luther King Jr. and his life. It is about the Selma movement. So, of course, it's going to be a lot of marching and a lot of protesters and this and that and the other thing. And you're right, Joe. We don't maybe get a ton of Martin Luther King's character, but again, this is 2 to 3 months or whatever in his life.
Well, which I'm okay with,
you
but
know,
when you look at all the other biopics that are out there, Hitchcock focusing on Psycho, King's Speech,
or Lincoln.
And Lincoln.
You learn a lot about Lincoln through that.
Well, we also had an extra hour with that movie.
It's true. Well, this is the thing. I do agree, yes, it is about the Selma movement, but it does feel kind of rushed, even in that, because, let's face it, this is the Martin Luther King movie.
Yeah.
Because he's at the center of it. He's the main character.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's not called King, which would be awesome if they did a sequel or something. But that's the problem. I think it's trying to be about the Selma movement, but it also wants to be about Martin Luther King and really showcase what they can do with this man and bring him to life fictionally in this period of a couple months. And I think that's the problem. And if you wanted to focus on the movement of Selma, Martin Luther King would be one of the main characters, or he'd be a supporting character. He'd be someone like Malcolm X that shows up, has a scene or two, maybe in the background, but he's the center of the movie. Mm-hmm. So that's the problem, I think, is that it's not really focusing as much on the movement as you might think.
I can appreciate that.
And you can obviously tell because that's the selling point. Is, they want him to be the focus, and he is. But it's also about Selma, which is why everything feels a bit disjointed.
Okay. Like I said, I think DuVernay's directing and she co-wrote the script as well is lacking in certain areas. I definitely agree with that. But I don't know. I thought for what it is, it may be a little bit one-sided, but the Butler was rife with historical inaccuracies.
True.
To compare, similar themed movies.
And I didn't like that movie as much as this one. So
exactly.
They're about even for me.
I'm glad you brought it up, though, because that actually is a good comparison about The Butler. Mm-hmm. In that film, admittedly, of course, it was showcasing the presidents and going through history, and that was kind of an issue, too. But it was still about him. I still knew his character. He grew.
That's true.
Even though there was a lot of time devoted to a lot of other characters.
Yeah.
And I feel like...
Well, but he definitely grew because it was over the course of, 5, 6 presidents.
That's true.
Here, again, it's only a few months in Martin Luther King's life, and he was already an established, civil rights leader. Would I have liked a different movie also where we show how he became this civil rights leader? And sure, show me that movie as well. But that wasn't what this was about. So I didn't really mind so much that we didn't really dive that much into his character.
My point is, if you're not going to showcase Martin Luther King, then showcase the movement, which I don't think it did quite as well as it could have.
All right. Well, maybe we'll like our next movie more then. The Wedding Ringer. Joe's going to tell us about that.
I'm the lucky one. The Wedding Ringer is a romantic comedy / drama, apparently, written and directed by Jeremy Garlick. Garlic is how it looks like it's pronounced here. It stars Kevin Hart, Josh Gad, and Kaylee Cuoco Sweeting. Jimmy Callahan, played by Kevin Hart, provides best man services, pretending to be the best man for grooms without friends. As Doug Harris, played by Josh Gad, is a successful tax attorney, and his fiancée, Gretchen, played by Kaylee, are planning for their wedding day, Doug becomes frantic searching for the best man. He faints and is referred to Jimmy's company, Best Man Inc. Doug meets Jimmy and asks him to pull off a golden tux, which means 7 groomsmen, because he has no friends and he promised 7 groomsmen to match Gretchen's bridesmaids, and this has apparently never been done before. Jimmy refuses, and he's claiming that he's been complacent and he doesn't need the pressure, but when Doug offers him $50,000, he decides to be Doug's best man, and hijinks ensue. I actually was kind of looking forward to this movie because it looked like it would have been an okay time. Like, okay, it's dumb, but it's fun. But I didn't really understand the plot. I really didn't. They didn't really go into much detail. the thing about this movie is that literally, I'd say not even 5 minutes in, the plot should be over. It just shouldn't happen. This entire situation is beyond preposterous, even by movie logic. It just shouldn't happen. You could cut down the motivations of the characters immediately. Like, okay, gee, Josh Gad, I'm sorry, you don't have enough friends? Well, okay, how about you don't lie to your fiancé and just suck it up and get married? Oh, well, you know, if I lie to her and I don't have anybody to think I'm a loser, he won't marry me. Well, then he shouldn't be marrying her in the first place. Okay. And then, of course, there's Kevin Hart's whole business, which just shouldn't exist. Like, how does he sustain himself? Who would pay for these services? Who would do that? I don't really understand. You got to pay $5,000, $50,000. Who has money to spend like that on such a preposterous lie? That, on one hand, it's incredibly stupid. The second part is that they continue on with these hijinks as if that we're supposed to get behind these characters when everything they're doing is reported on a lie. So it's really, really hard to get behind people that are doing something morally reprehensible. And so for me, there are hints of funny here, but in all honesty, I was just so distracted by how stupid it was and how immoral it was. I do think Gad and Hart have some chemistry, but this movie is nowhere near as fun as it should be. I'm sorry, I give this one a D. It's terrible. It's not fun. It's just, it really bothered me deep down.
Yeah, it's an incredibly thin premise too. Not only is it unbelievable and ridiculous, but you're right. It should be over in 5 minutes. There's nothing
where to
really,
go with it.
Yeah, and from the trailer, it looked similar to I Love You, Man. Paul Rudd has no friends, so he seeks out to... But he's being honest with Rashida Jones. I don't know if either of you have seen that movie. But,
that's a big plus, at least,
But, so, he's being honest with her and saying, look, I don't have any friends. Maybe I'll go find one. Whereas, you're right. This is all just like, let's just lie to everyone. But it's an even longer way to get down the aisle, too. They stretch out these jokes, like, over scenes and scenes. Like, the scene where him and Josh Gad go to the wedding and, like, do the dancing, and it was just like...
Move on.
Well, it was just, it's like...
They know there's not much of a plot here.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, I feel like this is sort of Kevin Hart's, In Living Color moment. Oh, I wasn't on In Living Color, so now I'm going to do all this sketch comedy for 5 different wedding scenarios. He does the Jewish wedding, and he does the nerd's wedding, and Josh Gad's wedding. Most of the groomsmen also are not that funny.
Yeah.
Even remotely.
And that's a problem. I mean, I think they could have given them some good lines, and I like some of the people involved. I mean, Jorge Garcia from Lost, and Affion Crockett I like, but their characters are weak and
unlikable.
They're all sort of degenerates, and then not only that, but the resolution is both obvious and ridiculous.
Yeah.
The positives I have for the movie are that I did laugh from time to time. Not a lot, but it's there. I like Kevin Hart. I think definitely more than Justin, but probably more than you as well, Joe.
It's true.
So that didn't bother me as much. I like Josh Gad a lot too, but I felt like he wasn't given a ton to do here. I think really Kevin Hart has most of the funny lines. Also, Kelly Cuoco's father, he gets a couple of good laughs in there. Nothing we haven't seen before. But I give it a D+. It's not good, but if you're a Kevin Hart fan, I think you might appreciate it a little bit. I mean, the theater I was in, there were people howling. Not at anything I thought that was particularly funny, but, I think if you're a Hart fan, you will enjoy it. So for that, I'll give it a D+, but it's not good. It's ridiculous. Justin?
Well, for me, I think Kevin Hart has 2 modes. This witty character, but willing to take his time to deliver a clever quip or two, or an obnoxious and arguably racist loudmouth who never shuts up and people think is apparently funny. With The Wedding Ringer, it's the latter. Aside from the fact that, unlike you, Joe, I thought Hart and Gad had almost non-existent chemistry. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 decent jokes that they get together, but that's about it. And even if you just took out everything involved in its comedic nature, it's still disgustingly misogynistic, and more importantly, it doesn't have any idea what it wants to be. Some of the time it comes off like a farcical comedy, and then other times it's straight up screwball, particularly with the incessant sketches. But it is a miserable comedy experience to kick off 2015. I give it a D.
No F?
Why not an F? You didn't say one good thing about it.
I feel like there was like one or two decent gags that were passable. The scene with the dad in the football was relatively funny.
That actually wasn't too bad.
I mean, it's ripped off of Wedding Crashers, but...
And it went on way too long.
Yeah, that too.
But, that is true. The dad was kind of funny. I forgot about him.
Yeah.
He was all right. He was also very mean, though. I didn't like him. So I don't know.
No, that's true. But who are you supposed to like in this movie? Because you don't like her.
Well,
nope.
I mean, I guess you're supposed to like Josh Gad and feel bad for him.
But you can't because he's a lying... I know they try to make it sympathetic, but I just can't get behind it. I don't know.
That didn't affect me quite as much as it did you guys. I mean, he's obviously a loser. We get that from the very first scene when he's trying to call his acquaintances from 10 years ago in college that all reject him as best man. So, I don't know. I felt a little sympathetic for him.
Maybe a little, but I don't know. Because, like I said, I mean, okay, first of all, I find it unlikely that you can get to that point where you have absolutely no friends. And even if you don't, suck it up. Some people go through that, and you've got, like, the beautiful wife who loves you, right? That's kind of good, too.
Yeah, but they also position her as... sort of a bridezilla, so I can't imagine him saying to her, hey, I don't have any friends to balance out your 7 bridesmaids. She's so particular about this wedding, I feel like her character would just flip out. So I get it.
That might be the case. I mean, I understand what they were going for, but the point is, I feel like, her character wasn't really that established in that sense, to the point where it's like you said, it's completely predictable.
Right.
You know where the story's going to go anyway, where like, okay, he has to learn something about himself by learning about something about her, but what's the setup? I mean, since it's that obvious from the get-go, what's the point of even having the movie?
No, there is none.
So,
there really isn't.
So that's the problem. So yeah, I get it.
No, you're right.
I don't think it really matters.
Yeah. All right, well, up next is Paddington. This is based on the incredibly popular children's book character created by Michael Bond. Paddington is a live-action and CGI film starring Hugh Bonneville and Sally Hawkins as Mr. and Mrs. Brown, parents of a London family who take Paddington in when an earthquake kills much of his family in darkest Peru, and his aunt sends him to find a kindly explorer that visited darkest Peru 40 years earlier. Nicole Kidman plays a natural history taxidermist named Millicent, who has more sinister ideas for the bear. Paddington is voiced by Ben Whishaw, and Julie Walters co-stars as Mrs. Bird, the Browns' nanny. This movie is surprisingly good. I was a fan of the bear as a child, and while it wasn't my favorite story, I do remember him fondly. The previews, however, made this film look very cartoony and silly, when in fact the opposite is true. There are some silly characters and situations, as you'll get with pretty much any family movie, but Paddington is also very dark. The story is great, and though Kidman is certainly hit or miss with me, she probably steals the show here as the villain. Pretty much everything about this movie works. The only things I can really say in the negative are that the Brown children are the most basic teenage kids you could get. There's really nothing going on there that is special. And though I admire Paul King's directing here, he gets a little too experimental in some spots, and the script doesn't really call for it. But I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I think it's a good watch for kids and parents alike, and it's an A- from me. Justin?
I gotta say, in an age of hackneyed and weak family films, thank goodness for Paddington. Wishaw gives us a character that's not only fun to watch, but the film has some genuinely funny moments without relying on potty humor, fart jokes, and pop culture references, keeping it relatively minimal. And what I really do like about this movie is it gives the entire cast something fun to do to contribute. Yes, the kids are a little generic, but they're believable as well. And the film does add in interesting setups to allow them time to shine later on. My only real issue with the film is I think there are a couple moments where it gets a little too cutesy, sometimes possibly meta, such as in the railway station lighting up Lost and Found, and obviously Paddington, as the trailer might suggest. Mm-hmm. But I thought this was great, fun family entertainment. I give it a B+.
I don't know. It sounded like you liked it as much as I did. You're too hard on family movies, Justin. You love this movie. Your only negative is that sometimes they lit up the sign. Like
I said, it gets
that's not a B+.
Justin, that's an A, man.
Not to mention, I feel like there's a couple times it winks a little too much at the audience. Oh, hey, we're lighting up plot points. Pay attention to this, kids.
Well, it is a movie for like 5-year-olds. I mean, there was a lot of little kids in the theater.
Oh, there are. I'm not denying that.
This is a kid's book, so I can't fault them for that.
I do understand where you're going with the experimental filmmaking. For me, it was more or less the fact that they were essentially ripping off Wes Anderson and Moonrise Kingdom. But
actually, are we talking about the the dollhouse stuff?
The dollhouse motif, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool.
Oh, it was cool. It was just
there's a few different things like that. That was one of them, but there was just a couple like shots that were like I don't know if they were Wes Anderson-y, but sort of more experimental, certainly, for a kid's movie.
I guess I must have glossed over it, but I know there were some things that were a bit artsy, but I didn't think it was overly experimental.
Joe, what did you think of Paddington?
Well, I loved Paddington.
As did I.
I actually didn't really know what to think about it going because I'm not as familiar with the bear as you are, but I think the thing that surprised me is that it's just one of those great examples of that type of family film I think we should strive for, where it tells a fairly basic story that we've seen before, but just adds something totally new and different. I mean, just it has this whole sense of mythological power to it. It's got an old world that just expands upon, and at the same time, it's oddly enough, even though they're bears, it's a very human story. And Paddington is really likable, and he's complicated, and he's incredibly believable. And I love the supporting cast. I love the villain. I think Nicole Kidman was great.
She was fantastic in this.
I think it was a lot of fun, and it just really balanced. I liked some of the cartoony elements that you would expect in an adventure film like this, but it was still very grounded and had like this interesting mystery and intrigue. There was a lot going on there. There was even apparently some subtext about immigration and prejudice, which I think was very smart. I like it when there's something that is there for kids, but there's something for adults too. I think that anybody could walk away from this movie enjoying it. I actually would give it an A.
Oh, well.
I think it's well-deserved. And yes, you're right, Justin. All the characters get something to do because there's only like 8 people in this movie. I mean, they don't pad it out with extra filler. I mean, it's the 4 members of the family, the nanny, Nicole Kidman, her helper, the neighbor, Paddington's aunt, and that's really about it. I mean, it's a fairly contained story. Some people have 1 or 2 lines here or there, like a policeman or her the daughter's like boyfriend. But yeah, I mean, everybody definitely got something to do. The Hugh Bonneville character was great. I'm not familiar with him, but I know he's on Downton Abbey, so people know him. But I thought he did a great job. His character might get on board a little too easily, but I think he's trying to be like,
I don't know, for 90
cool
minutes,
dad.
I thought he had a decent arc.
Oh, he definitely has an arc. I'm just saying it happens a little quick. I mean, in the one day he's like, forget this, you're getting rid of this bear tomorrow, and then the next morning he wakes up, okay, let's go save the day with you,
I think the reason why it kind of worked was because we got to see why he was like that. It wasn't like he was this mean guy. He had his reasons.
Yeah. That's true.
I think
that was a good scene.
That was a great scene.
It was easier to accept because we saw he wasn't quite as bad as you might have expected.
Right.
So that's why it didn't really bother me too much.
Okay.
But I will admit, maybe it did happen a little fast, but it's a pretty fast-paced movie.
It is.
So
it is. And, I really think it is one that parents and kids can enjoy. Maybe on 2 separate levels, like you said, Joe.
But it's layered. It works.
But it is layered.
And I do agree. It is pretty dark. Like, it starts off
very dark.
Like, what happens to me, I'm like, wow, this is like some old school Disney, like, wow. I mean, that's heavy. But it proves,
well,
kids handle it.
This scene shared with Paddington and Nicole Kidman towards the end of the film is very dark as well.
Yeah, it gets pretty dark, but, it can. It makes it more powerful when they get out of the situations.
Yeah. Well, up next is going to be Tusk. This is the first of, we have 2 home media moments on the show this week, trying to sort of bang out as many as we can that will count for 2014 before we do our Oscar wrap-up in about a month's time, where we sort of revisit our top 20 and include some of the movies that we didn't get to see before the end of the year, like Selma and Imitation Game, and Tusk is one of these as well. So Justin's going to tell us about that.
Wallace, played by Justin Long, and his buddy Teddy, played by Haley Joel Osment, are two popular podcasters looking for a wacky story to put on their show. However, when a possible lead goes tragically dry in Canada, Wallace meets a strange fellow named Howard Howe, played by Michael Parks, whose stories of his past with a walrus named Mr. Tusk all but beg to get on the show until Wallace finds out Howe's true intentions. For as dumb as Tusk is, and believe me listeners, it is truly, truly dumb, the first portion of the film I honestly thought was surprisingly entertaining and kind of funny. It's just the more it gets into its disturbing, twisted, human centipede-like premise, the more its comedy falls apart, particularly when they insert Johnny Depp as this weird Canadian Inspector Clouseau knockoff character that is more annoying than funny. But for me, the biggest concern isn't necessarily the film itself, but where the film may be heading. Obviously, because this was successful, we're getting Clerks 3, but I feel like director Kevin Smith's overall influence, shall we say, particularly during his podcast section over the end credits, I'm a little concerned about what Clerks 3 might look like. For the first half and some sections in the second, I guess, I'm going to give Tusk a C.
Joe, what'd you think?
Well, I really like Tusk. I definitely can understand some of your issues. I can't really fight them, but I generally really like Kevin Smith's brand of humor, and I did here. I thought that it was definitely dark, but I think the thing that really interested me was that for about the first act or two in the movie, it actually was really good. I was really engaged. I was interested. I wasn't entirely sure what was going on, because I admit, I don't know much about Tusk. I mean, I heard generally a horror comedy film that Kevin Smith did. That was about it. I actually liked Justin Long in this. I thought he was an interesting protagonist. I thought he carried the movie. I thought Howard Howe, spoilers, was a really engaging villain. I was really enraptured every time he was introduced, talking about all the stories and just recounting things like about Ernest Hemingway being lost at sea.
Oh, he's a great character actor.
Oh, yes. I enjoyed him. I enjoyed his performance. I thought it was really good. I thought there were some interesting dynamics between relationships and commentary on the internet, podcasts, entertainment, reflection, and obviously Kevin Smith's own personal experiences therein. As the movie goes on, it gets more bizarre and I guess honestly kind of disturbing, but considering it is a horror comedy, it was funny and it was disturbing and scary for me. I don't know. It definitely does lose itself a bit towards the end. I can agree with that, Justin. It has become a bit iffy. But for the most part, I think it was kind of a commentary on the human centipede shock factor, not necessarily becoming that. Did it completely succeed? I don't know. But for the most part, I thought it was interesting, clever, funny, and dark and terrifying. I actually leave it with a B+.
Wow. Yeah, for me, I'm with Justin on this. For me, the main issue is the genesis of the idea. For those that don't know, I mean, this was made from a throwaway line from one of Kevin Smith's podcasts, and I think that pulling that into a feature-length film proved very difficult here. It is a genuinely good thriller for the first hour, up until the reveal of the walrus creature itself. From then on, everything cannot be at all taken seriously. And I know that it's supposed to be a horror comedy, but the thriller aspect was really good in the first half, and the comedy was as well. But once they sort of make that switch over in the middle, it just didn't work for me at all. The only thing I did like about it, Justin, was Johnny Depp doing his detective bit. I thought that was a bright spot from the second half. But yeah, this is just a mixed bag here. I definitely cannot recommend it. It's a C- actually for me. What did you think of Johnny Depp, Joe?
I thought he was okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't think it was particularly great, but it was nice to see him. I thought his character was all right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I thought it was interesting, kind of liven things up a little bit, because the second half does get pretty messy.
Yeah, and, you know, it could have probably been played by anybody. I mean,
yeah,
in disguise pretty well, too. That
I will admit,
it took me a little bit.
I didn't recognize it first.
To know. Which for Johnny Depp, we've talked about this on the show. I mean, his last, 10 or 12 movies,
looks the same.
He's the same character. So I loved seeing him in this
do something different.
In this new kind of perspective where I didn't even know it was him right away.
I didn't.
You know, that's something. I mean, he could have shown up as Tonto for all we know. He injected himself that way.
Probably could have fit, actually.
Somehow.
Yeah.
I do admit that I am not familiar with Hal really at all. I mean, I'm sure I've probably seen him pop up.
He was on
here
Argo
or there, but
in a scene.
Oh, really?
He was like, "Oh yeah, I want you to spin it this way. What kind of monster you want it to be? What kind of sci-fi? We have like 2 days." He literally had one scene.
Wow.
Character.
Yeah.
Actor,
okay. Yeah. I thought he did a great job here. I generally like Justin Long, so I thought he did well also.
Well, I will admit the comedy does lose itself a bit as it goes along, but I think the thing that really I enjoyed for this movie was that I really did like the thriller aspect. Ironically, when I thought it was a more serious horror movie was when it was at its strongest.
And I agree.
Yeah.
And the second half of the movie is when
it tries
Justin
too hard.
Long is so ridiculous that nothing becomes scary anymore. It becomes,
really?
Every time he shows up, it's just like, yeah, really? Are we doing this again in this scene?
Because it's incredibly stupid.
Because it's incredibly stupid. And, like, you take a horror comedy like Cabin in the Woods, where it is scary and funny throughout, the tone remains the same. Here, it's such a drastic shift that I had trouble keeping up with the thriller aspect, which was great.
I guess that was kind of the joke. It's all this build-up, and then it is what you would expect it to be.
Right.
But I think that was actually kind of what he was going for, so I don't know, that's how I kind of looked at it.
Okay.
Because the whole thing was kind of the build-up. Okay, Kevin Smith, actually, he's written a lot of comics, actually. Kevin Smith did basically make the Green Arrow a reputable character again. The point is, I tend to like his more serious writing, which is, I guess, one reason I really enjoy Tusk for the most part. And like I said, the ending, yes, I can agree, it does go off the rails, but I would say it feels like a tonal shift, but it never really was. It just was integrated differently.
Okay.
Because you know how it was basically comedy speckled about in the beginning, and then the end is complete farce for the most part. But since the premise was always there to begin with, what were you really expecting? I mean, he's turned into a walrus man. Spoilers.
I just expected something a little bit better. I mean,
more balanced, I would argue.
Yeah, I loved the thriller aspect, and it just completely disappears. So obviously, it worked for you. It is a very divisive movie. Some people really are behind it, and some people feel sort of more like Justin and myself. So, but let's check out our second home media moment, and that is The Congress. And Joe's going to tell us about that.
The Congress is a 2013 French-Israeli science fiction drama film with elements of animation thrown in, written and directed by Ari Folman, who directed one of my favorite movies in recent years, Waltz with Bashir. Robin Wright plays a fictionalized version of herself, an aging actress with a reputation for being fickle, apparently, so nobody's willing to offer her roles. Her son Aaron suffers from a disorder that is slowly destroying his sight and hearing. With the help of Dr. Baker, played by Paul Giamatti, yay! Robin is barely able to stave off the worst of the effects of her son's decline. Robin agrees then to sell the film rights to her digital image to Miramount Studios, apparently a fictionalized future version of Paramount and Miramax combined, in exchange for a large sum and promise to never act again. After her body is digitally scanned, the studio will be able to make films starring her using only her computer-generated characters. 20 years later, as her contract is about to expire, Robin travels to Abraham City, where she will speak at Miramount's Futurological Congress and also renew her contract there. By then, Robin's digital likeness has become the star of a popular science fiction film franchise, Rebel Robot Robin. Abraham City is an animated zone where individuals use chemicals to become animated avatars of themselves, entering into a mutable illusionary state. They can become anything they want to be, essentially. While discussing the new contract with Miramount, Robin learns that the studio has developed a new technology that will allow anyone to transform themselves into her. Robin agrees to deal, but has a crisis of conscience. Well, this movie is really trying to focus on a lot of really complicated themes. It's focusing on a lot of classic science fiction ideas, but it starts off really as a really powerful human drama, and it's a lot of self-commentary for Robin Wright herself. And I kind of left the film thinking, all right, Michael Keaton has Birdman, Robin Wright has The Congress. Really, it's a commentary about media and the relation of media in regards to the populace themselves, but it also goes even further than that, going to existentialist ideas about the concept of, false reality and not dealing with your own individual reality and the use of fictionalization and imagination over not focusing on your own problems and then the truth of the world around it. And then, of course, there's the style itself, which is the whole animated zone where people basically become cartoon characters, and it showcases some pretty awesome animation. I really enjoyed most aspects of this movie. The biggest problem is that it does get a little too complicated in regards to its own mythology, where it plays with the constant idea of what is real, what is not, and so it makes the plot a little harder to follow as it goes along. Overall, though, I think there's some really strong performances here, particularly from Robin. Really, she's an excellent actress, and the animation's beautiful. There's some great science fiction ideas, but there's also a really compelling human drama at the center that, for the most part, works. I leave it with an A-.
Justin, how about for you?
Well, like you, Joe, I loved Fullman's Waltz with Bashir. But while his second outing, I think, has a lot to say, and in abundance, I don't think it's even remotely possible to get all the information in this film in one sitting. Mm-hmm. It's also incredibly on the nose with Mirror Mount, with some of the overall meta commentary, and so on and so forth. I respect the satire. Make no mistake, I definitely do respect it. But in several instances, particularly when they get into the animated world, it often descends into overkill and makes the ordeal a struggle to focus on, given that there's so much going on. I mean, it's stylistically gorgeous, and I could honestly see it getting a big cult following in a couple years, particularly in how it's handled and what some of the deeper themes might be, but it's just nowhere near as gripping and powerful as his first outing. I leave it with a B-.
I'm with you again, Justin. This is quite the rarity here.
Yeah, don't see that too often.
I think there's a lot of interesting ideas here. You guys, both mentioned them. And a lot of them are very intriguing. I think some of them could have been explored even further, and some of them could have been dialed back a bit. I do think that the movie has a huge tonal shift once we get into the animated world, and there's too much happening. I feel like either we could have gone back and forth between the animated world and the real world. I know that's not exactly how the story flowed, but it may have made a little more sense that way to me. I think the voice work from Robin Wright once they get to the animated world is great. I'm not super familiar with her, but I have been enjoying her on House of Cards lately, and I think she really is great here. You're absolutely right about that, Joe. I did wonder, though, why she was playing herself and not a fictional actress like Michael Keaton in Birdman. I made the same sort of mental comparison, and I don't know if it would have added something or detracted, but the things sort of surrounding her and her career don't really match up with Robin Wright herself. So I just thought it was weird that she was herself and not somebody else. I love the climax of the movie, the last 5 minutes maybe or so. I thought it really, sort of came back together. But there's just too much really going on for me to, I think, be able to appreciate it like you did, Joe. And I don't know if that's because you're more a sci-fi fan and sort of more used to a lot of really complex themes happening. I don't know. But I definitely got a little bit lost. For me, it's a C+. Mm. What's your take on that, guys? Do you think the movie would have been different if Robin Wright was not playing a version of herself?
I don't think it would have changed too dramatically, but there was one other point that you made, which was possibly jumping between both worlds. Mm-hmm. I see where you're coming from with that, but have you seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
I have not.
Okay.
It's the one Jim Carrey movie I think ever that I've not seen.
Well, without giving too much away, I feel like it would have become too much of that.
Yeah, you're not a fan of that movie.
I respect it, but I also think it's kind of overrated.
Okay.
Well, I think some of it was showcasing the animation because
the animation was beautiful.
That's his thing.
Yeah.
But he proved that he can do stuff outside of that, which was pretty cool.
Mm.
I think there definitely is a lot going on, and believe me, I didn't. There's themes, and then there's themes, and there's layers and layers.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot that even I was like, okay, after a certain point, okay, I'm not entirely sure what story we're focusing on.
Right.
I will admit I had a little trouble with that, but because of the climax, I kind of understood what was going on back in the animated zone more.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would agree with that.
That's why it didn't bother me quite as much that I got a little lost because it came together. I thought the ending was a little bit ambiguous, personally. But that was
Yeah,
the
I agree with
point.
you on that one.
But then again,
yeah, I didn't mind that it was ambiguous, though.
I mean, like I said, it is still focusing on a lot of things we've seen before. I mean, really, it's just a more complicated version of the Matrix in a lot of ways.
Okay, I could see that.
For example,
Definitely.
but
Yeah.
it's still so unique, and I think there were some things that were a bit on the nose, Justin, but I believe that was the point. I don't think it was trying to not be. And there was so much subtlety in the movie that I think you could afford to be a little on the nose with mere amount. I mean, to answer your question, Dan, I mean, maybe she felt that way about it. I mean, to be honest, looking at her career, I don't know if it really reflects her that much, but to be honest, between Princess Bride and House of Cards and Forrest Gump, I mean,
There's a pretty big gap.
there aren't that many huge ones.
Okay, I suppose that's fair.
It's like Michael Keaton. Okay, yes, the guy he's playing, Regan, isn't necessarily a big failure, but Michael Keaton is not as big as he was when he was Beetlejuice or Batman.
Right.
It's a fact. So
But he's not playing Michael Keaton.
That's
No.
true, but there are still similarities.
Yeah, well,
Yes,
clearly.
you're right. I don't know
Clearly.
why she chose to actually do that, but I felt that it made it more personal. I thought that
Okay.
she probably took on the role saying, hey, I'll use this because maybe it is speaking to something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that enhanced the performance. So I think at its core it was good, maybe a little jumbled, but stylistically and thematically I thought it was fantastic.
All right. Well, that is going to wrap it up for this week's new releases. We do still have one huge Oscar movie to tackle, and that will be next week with American Sniper, which just had a record-shattering opening weekend. So we'll talk about that next week. But most of the other Oscar nominees we have seen, and so we now present our top 5 Oscar snubs for this year. And Justin, we'll start with you, and we're going to basically give a movie or an actor or actress, say the category that they should have been nominated for, and politely kick someone out of that category that did get nominated.
My number 5 is Stephen Knight for Locke, Best Original Screenplay. Really intense, yet really well-written story in slightly over 80 minutes. It kept the focus strong and the performances on screen and off sensational. Who I think should be replaced? E. Max Fry and Dan Futterman for Foxcatcher. Number 4, I don't know how you two are going to feel about, but it's Jessica Chastain for Interstellar, Best Supporting Actress. Now, I confess I have huge issues with Interstellar as a whole. I will happily say Chastain's one of the best things about it. The moment her character gets involved into this movie, it just springs to life. I thought the first 90 minutes were incredibly boring, but once she gets into it, it really starts moving along.
I have no problem with that. I liked Interstellar by far the most on the show, and I love Jessica Chastain, so that's fine by me.
She's a great actress. It's a good choice.
Yes, that's fine.
Fair enough.
Done.
And who I think she should replace? Meryl Streep for Into the Woods.
Ooh.
It's been a long time coming, but I think it's finally arrived. Meryl Streep, you do not deserve this award. Number 3, I think you'll like, Joe, and that is Chris O'Dowd, Calvary, Best Supporting Actor. Quite possibly one of the most challenging and demanding characters we saw in 2014 that truly serves as a testament to how much acting range O'Dowd honestly has. We've seen him do a lot of comedy. This was so far out of his comfort zone, and it was awesome. Who should he replace? Hands down, Robert Duvall, the judge. The only reason I think he has this award is because
He's Robert Duvall.
he's Robert Duvall. No excuse. And my number 2, Ralph Fiennes, The Grand Budapest Hotel, Best Actor.
Ooh.
We called 2014 the year of the Fiennes for a reason, and this is definitely part of it. Half the reason I think the comedy in The Grand Budapest works is largely to his charming deadpan delivery and the fact that the rest of his fellow cast members are completely on board. And as for who he should replace, Bradley Cooper, American Sniper.
Whoa.
Now, Justin is the only one of us that has actually seen American Sniper thus far, so I obviously couldn't kick him off.
Plot twist.
I haven't seen it yet. Well, for me, I present first an honorable mention, and that is Life Itself for Best Documentary.
Yeah.
I have to present it as an honorable mention because I haven't actually seen any of the other nominees. You know, documentary category is one of those that usually kind of have to catch them once they come out on home video. But I did want to throw that in there. I was very surprised that in a branch made up of actors, directors, etc., that they would not want to honor a great documentary from the most famous reviewer of film. My number 5 is Chef. It got no nominations in anything, so I'll just go for the big guns and say it should be nominated for Best Picture. It is easily one of the best movies of the year. We all had it pretty highly rated when we did our top 30 a couple of weeks ago. For the Best Picture category, there are 10 slots possible, and they only picked 8 this year, so I'm not going to kick anything out. This would just be sort of a 9th slot. My number 4 is Snowpiercer's Tilda Swinton for Best Supporting Actress. Tilda Swinton had a fantastic year with not only Snowpiercer, but Only Lovers Left Alive and The Grand Budapest Hotel, but I thought this is the film she really shone in. And I also kick out Meryl Streep for Into the Woods. I love Meryl Streep. This was a great performance from her, but I would say she's probably not even the best one in the movie. That is Emily Blunt. So I'm going to say goodbye to her. My number 3 is David Oyelowo for Selma. I mean, this is one of the best performances of the year, hands down. But the reason I have him at number 3 is because I think the acting field for males this year is incredibly hard to beat. Michael Keaton obviously has to be in there. Redmayne's got to be in there. Haven't seen American Sniper, so I can't speak to Bradley Cooper. So I'm actually going to kick out Steve Carell. I think he did a great job in Foxcatcher, but compared to this, not so much. Number 2 for me is The Lego Movie for Best Animated Feature. Somehow every year the Academy seems to not give love to one of the biggest pictures of the year in this category. Last year it was Monsters University. This year it is The Lego Movie. 2 of the nominations are very little seen films, so I can't kick them out. I kick out Box Trolls. Not one of my favorites. I mean, you could have put in Peabody over Box Trolls for me. Joe, how about for you?
Well, I'll just start off with a couple honorable mentions for things I kind of wanted to show up. I think that Under the Skin probably should have gotten some kind of more buzz than it did because it was so critically enjoyed. I think Johansson for that definitely should have gotten something. Amy Adams deserves something at this point.
Always does.
Gyllenhaal, I think, was a bit overlooked. Also, Rene Russo from Nightcrawler for supporting. So those are some honorable mentions I was floating around. My number 5 for the animated film, Lego Movie. The fact that this just wasn't acknowledged at all is completely ridiculous. In terms of the one I would kick off, that's easy. Box Trolls.
For sure.
Box Trolls was, decent, but very disappointing. Wasn't as good as it should have been. My number 4 might actually surprise you guys. For Best Supporting Actor, Shia LaBeouf from Fury. I thought he did an excellent job with his role there. And who I'd kick off is very easy once again. Robert Duvall for The Judge. Really,
It's a stupid nomination.
Really,
Yeah, it's a sentimental nomination is what it is.
It is, and you'll have those from time to time, I guess. But, it's a bit frustrating. My number 3 would make you happy, Dan. It's actually going to be for Best Screenplay, Chef.
Yeah.
This movie, I wasn't sure exactly what to do because I'm thinking, okay, director picture. It was great in a lot of categories, but got to give it something. I mean, it was completely overlooked, so I would give it the screenplay. It just had a really solid story that I did enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd kick off Foxcatcher. I thought Foxcatcher's script, there were some great performances and basic story ideas, but on the whole, I think it was a bit clunky. And I guess my number 2 and my number 1 will actually be the easiest ones because there are 2 Best Picture spots. Yep. This will make you happy, I think, Justin, but my number 2 would actually be Locke. I think Locke was a very enjoyable film. I think that in terms of the technical experience reading this condensed story, I think that it should have gotten more acknowledgement.
Justin, what is the biggest atrocity this year with the Oscar nominees?
Well, you both said it, gentlemen, and that is The Lego Movie, Best Animated Feature. Honestly, no excuse why this was not nominated. Clever and original storytelling with a unique animation style never seen before.
It is the only movie, I believe, in the animated category that was in any of our top 30s of the year.
Thus far, yeah.
Nobody had How to Train Your Dragon. Nobody had Big Hero 6. I mean, this was the animated movie of the year for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And what you to replace? Unlike you, gentlemen, I will have an upset. Big Hero 6.
Oh,
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I didn't love it. It was good, but, I mean, it was only a B+ from me.
I enjoyed it, but...
On the lower end of the recent Disney movies, I think.
Yeah.
My number 1 could go to many, many categories for this movie. It did get a couple of nominations, most notably Rosamund Pike. Of course, I refer to Gone Girl. That this is not up for Best Picture is absolutely ridiculous. I also could go for Carrie Coon, who played the sister. I could also go for screenplay, but of course there's the whole Whiplash debacle that Justin's been telling us about off the air, where it got nominated for adapted screenplay when it technically wasn't adapted. I think Gone Girl could go very well there.
Definitely.
But by and large, I think it should be Best Picture nominated. Joe?
Well, surprise to no one, the most overlooked movie this year, and just about the best movie of the year, I would say, is Calvary. I mean, a movie that's completely swept under the rug. I mean, I had this listed literally jokingly here on my list. Well, really, you could put this up for Best Picture, Screenplay, Direction, Cinematography, whatever. I mean,
Best Actor for sure.
well, that's what I'm actually going to pick. I decided
okay.
if it had to be anything to be nominated for, Brendan Gleeson is fantastic here. He steals the show. One of the best performances, if not the best performance of the year for me still. And if I had to kick somebody out, I'm sorry. Eddie Redmayne was good, but I don't think he was as stupendous as everybody said he was. So, from Theory of Everything, that's what I'd kick off. Though, Steve Carell, I could understand, but I'm just not really used to it. I think he did a good enough job for DuPont for me. But
Okay.
I could understand him getting kicked off, too.
Yeah. Well, we will see how all this shakes out in about a month or so. Maybe some of the people we kicked off are going to be the winners. That happened with me last year with Blue Jasmine Lady. Kate Blanchett.
Yeah.
Still never saw
I
that one.
kicked her off of my list.
You really don't need to.
Yeah, now that I mean, once we've reviewed it for the show, you don't need to see it now, Joe.
Wow.
It's all right. All right, and we will give our Oscar predictions alongside our revamped Best of the Year lists coming up in about a month. But first, we have our closer for the show, which is, as always, our triple feature of older films. Joe's going to tell us in a bit about his guilty pleasure for this month, a Steven Seagal classic, as they all are. But first up is our new classic, and that is Warm Bodies. It's a zombie romantic comedy based on the novel of the same name. It was directed and written for the screen by Jonathan Levine. The movie takes place some years after a zombie apocalypse and follows R, played by Nicholas Hoult, who lives in an abandoned airport with other members of the undead, including his friend M, Rob Corddry. While R and his friends are out scouting for brains one day, they come across Julie, played by Teresa Palmer, and her friends. They are all killed except Julie, who R is drawn to, especially after he eats her boyfriend's brain and sees his memories of them together. R makes Julie resemble a zombie so she can blend in with his pack and survive, and they stay in an empty airplane to keep her safe. But eventually it's time for her to return to the rest of the living in their walled-off community, including with her militant father, played by John Malkovich. R's passion for Julie encouraged some of the other zombies to start feeling again, and both groups must try and come together to defeat a common enemy, the Bonies. The film is a fun, creepy comedy, much in the vein of Zombieland. That is a better film overall, and has an entirely different direction, but the movies are similar in tone and style. There's a fair amount of good physical comedy here, and the movie pokes fun at romantic comedies while also incorporating their biggest tropes into its own story. Holt and Palmer are great together, but as he did in the dreadful sex tape, Rob Corddry steals the few scenes that he is in. My biggest complaint here is that it's all very watered down, as are most romance movies. It's not as funny as it could be, and it's also lacking some really good scares, so it's sort of watered down on all sides. But it is an enjoyable movie, and I give it a B+. Joe?
Warm Bodies, I actually enjoyed, I think, a little more the first time I saw it. I think watered down is a good way to put it. It holds together, but there's really not a whole lot there. There's some cool ideas, the premise of zombies actually kind of being more aware of what's going on, but not being able to help themselves. It's something that isn't played with too much. Unfortunately, it's kind of stuck in this very standard, blasé kind of story. People seem to be having some fun. There are some good laughs. There is some decent development, but it does feel like it has the potential to be a lot more. Plus, it does run on a bit too long. I found myself getting a little bored at some point. Like, after a couple of the cutesy scenes, they didn't need to repeat them. So, it may be about 15 minutes too long. It's okay. I can't really say it's bad, but I'm not really aching to ever watch it again. I leave it with a B-.
Now, Justin, you're the only one of us that has read the book.
That's correct.
And I know that when this first got released, you compared it not so favorably, so I'm interested to see your take on Warm Bodies.
Well, while Warm Bodies may be the strangest adaptation of a young adult novel inspired by a Shakespearean play, Romeo and Juliet, it certainly has its charms. Holt is a lot of fun as are, and the interplay between humans and zombies is, for the most part, enjoyable, albeit heavily watered down. The book, it got a lot more extreme, for lack of a better word. But unfortunately, I feel like the biggest setback with this is the much bigger story about the apocalyptic dystopia that sort of tears the line between the two worlds, with some really cheesy effects for the central antagonist, the Bonies.
What a terrible name.
And even with a really tacky name.
It's a lame name.
But honestly, for one of the first major releases in 2013 that came out that year, it's not bad. I give it a B-.
Yeah, I think this was a good early year entry for sure.
Yeah.
Now, if they went sort of more with the way the book was,
It wouldn't be PG-13. We'll start there.
Okay. So that was my question. I mean, obviously, this is a romance young adult movie, which are almost all PG-13. Mm-hmm. So I can see how they chose to do it that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, I not having read the book, I can't say what it takes away, but I mean, is the central plot is fairly faithful to the book?
Fairly's probably a good choice word. There's, for starters, R is portrayed a lot differently in the book.
How so?
In the movie, they imply that he's unemployed, or he was unemployed. In the book, he seems like he's relatively well off. He's wearing a fairly classy suit. There's this whole marriage subplot with his, quote, wife that backfires hideously.
So he was younger in the movie?
Yes. Like, in the book, he seemed like he was, like, early to mid-20s.
Okay.
Alongside that, Julie swears a ton in the book, and there's a lot of blood and gore.
Well, I guess watered down is definitely a good way to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, they could have gotten away with more blood and gore, I suppose, and gotten a PG-13, because no one cares about violence. But, yeah, you're right. She can't be cursing.
Or cursing.
if it's going to be.
I don't know. She gets to do one F-bomb.
Rip a guy's head off, but you can't say MFer, that's for sure.
I don't get that.
All right. Well, enough time spread on that, because I want to talk about Joe's guilty pleasure.
Bet you do.
It's called Half Past Dead, and let's hear about it.
Well, Half Past Dead is a 2002 American action film written and directed by Don Michael Paul in his directorial debut, and produced by Steven Seagal, who also starred in the lead role. The film co-stars Morris Chestnut, Ja Rule, and Nia Peoples. This was Steven Seagal's last theatrical release film in many countries until 2010's Machete. The film tells the story of a criminal, played by Morris Chestnut, who infiltrates a prison, which is Alcatraz, New Alcatraz, to interrogate a prisoner on death row about the location of a portion of gold he hid, while an undercover FBI agent, played by Seagal, has to stop him, and Ja Rule's in it because he was a former criminal undercover, but it doesn't really matter. This was basically part of our Guilty Pleasure month, and last year we discussed about how we kind of went fairly easy. We had to try to find something we thought was really, really bad that we still kind of liked. And, I decided I'd go for Seagal. And, this is really as far as I can go without honestly saying I don't like them. So, yes, there are definitely worse ones out there, for sure. Out of Reach is like one of the ones right after this, and it's pretty bad. But, so it is possible to get worse. I can definitely see what stopped it and kind of put a big dent in Seagal's career for a while. But I guess I'll go with a little bit of history as we do with our old classics.
Sure.
One of the big reasons why I like action movies is my mother, and she was a big fan of Steven Seagal. So growing up, Steven Seagal was one of my favorite action stars, and he's been in some legitimately good movies. I'm not sure if this is necessarily the best. In fact, it's really not. I think the best way to describe why I like this movie is, it's that rule where it's so bad it's good for me. I mean, the movie is really dumb. There really isn't much there. The action's ridiculous. It's over the top. Most of the acting is either over the top or bad. I will admit, Corrupt doesn't need to be in the movie. He's a superfluous, dumb character, but I guess I like some of the music. I like some of the fight scenes. I think the fact that Steven Seagal only had like 2 fights that were like barely there, and he still is the star is great. But there are a couple things I do legitimately like. I will admit there are some stupid editing things. It's trying really hard to be edgy and cool. It's all over the place. But I think the core story I do actually enjoy. I like Morris Chestnut's villain. I think he's really cool. I think he does do a legitimately good job. I like a couple of the scenes, like Seagal talking to Lester, the man on death row. I think there's some cool elements there. I like the judge. I like the warden. And I actually do like the very tiny dynamic between Ja Rule's character and Steven Seagal. I think there are a couple decent scenes there. Seagal isn't horrible in the movie. He's just kind of there.
That's
but
one way to put it.
He's kind of there. But, all in all, I think it's okay. But there are definitely some flaws with it. It's not a good movie, but I kind of enjoy it for its silliness. I don't take it seriously at all. I mean, the finale, they're jumping out of helicopters and they're talking at like level. So it's pretty hilarious if you don't take it seriously. It's on the line. It's a C+.
Okay. The lowest grade possible that we can have to actually bring an old classic.
I did watch it again. I got through it and I said, okay. I was considering a B-, but I'm like, it's not quite that good. Mm-hmm. I'll say it's barely passable for me. So
Justin?
Yeah. You went Rocket Man, so I bounced back with the best Seagal one I could find.
When it comes to guilty pleasures or just plain awful movies, Steven Seagal is king. I've heard tell of how bad this movie was for many a year, and was quite proud of myself for avoiding it until Joe brought it on our doorstep. There's potholes abound, atrocious editing, said the guy who ran Rocket Man I know, and hilariously epic use of test dummies.
That is true.
That was the best part. Ja Rule goes flying. It's one of the most hilarious things you'll ever see. Anytime somebody punches him, he just goes across the wall.
It's true.
It's freaking great.
But Joe, I don't know if you're going to win January, but you got my vote. It's an F.
Oh, no, he doesn't win. Nothing is worse than Rocket Man. Rocket Man is so horrible. I can't.
That was what I was
do
wondering.
it.
But did I beat Rocket Man? I guess no.
God, no.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You would have had to take a sledgehammer to my DVD and Blu-ray player, throw my cat out the window, and then defecate on my chair, and then run half past dead.
You really didn't like Rocket Man?
Rocket Man was the worst. I mean,
Okay.
it's one of the worst movies, probably in my bottom 5 of all time.
Jesus.
So you're not going to win.
Okay.
But
Oh.
you win, not a positive grade for me, but a non-failing grade for this movie.
Wow.
This movie is bad.
Okay.
It is really bad. In fact, the first thing I wrote for this movie is, what is even happening in this movie?
That's a pretty good question.
The plot is okay. I will concede to that. You're
okay.
not wrong there. Ja Rule's character is meaningless. The only purpose he serves, other than to go flying, is that one really dumb, quote-unquote, comedic scene where they're in the car and he's trying to teach Steven Seagal how to talk ghetto.
Which is pretty funny to me.
It's awful. It's awful. Nobody even really looks like they're having that much fun, which is a problem. But because of all of this, it does ever so slightly veer into the so bad it's good territory. And I'll be honest, this is the first Steven Seagal movie I've ever seen.
What?
Yes. Why? Why would I?
That is true.
Why would I subject myself to that?
You're not an action.
If I never saw Die Hard till a month ago, I'm not seeking out for justice.
That's true.
For me, this is a D.
Okay.
It is bad, but I have to say I didn't hate watching it.
Okay.
It's sort of like in that vein of it is terrible, but we were having a good time watching it and sort of joking around about the Ja Rule dummy and the horrible slow motion that was constant throughout the whole movie. It's corny, but I feel like it knows it's corny.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's trying to reinvent the wheel here with this
Nobody's
movie.
trying to fool anybody.
Yeah.
If you went to a movie called Half Past Dead, you should know what you're going to get.
Yes. I'll give you this too, Joe. I did like Morris Chestnut and Nia Peoples as the villains.
Yeah.
I can't say I'm a Nia Peoples fan, but I knew who she was, from 20 years ago when she did that Party Machine show. And so I sort of have a little nostalgia, I guess, for her. So it was not good, but it wasn't an F. But I don't know. I mean, where do I go from here? Under Siege? And that's a good movie?
That's probably the upper tier.
I'll tell you what, in the future, I'll actually run one of his best movies. Mm-hmm. He does have some really good ones, but this is like literally...
Hard to Kill, is that a good one?
I like Hard to Kill.
I've heard that was good.
Hard to Kill. My favorites are probably like the Under Siege movies. Under Siege 1 and 2 I like.
Executive Decision.
That's barely a Seagal movie, but it's good. Pretty much anything before 98, you know?
Well, I should mention, though, that in terms of critical appeal, this is by far the lowest of any of our guilty pleasures for either year, with 3% on Rotten Tomatoes and a universal loathing. So you've got that going for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we close our show this week with The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, which is in our Oscar A to Z slot. This was a 1974 film with one nomination, and that was for Best Adapted Screenplay, losing out to The Godfather 2.
Well, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Justin?
After recently graduating from high school, Duddy Kravitz, played by Richard Dreyfuss, sets out to make a name for himself and stop living in the shadows of his brother Lenny, played by Alan Rosenthal. Though after learning that land ownership is the best way to achieve this from the town elder, Duddy explores various means to get rich fast and find out whether or not money can truly buy happiness. The tagline for this movie was, "There's a little bit of Duddy Kravitz in everyone." And while I think that may be true in some cases, Duddy's also a very inconsistent character. Over the course of the 2-hour running time, we see Duddy start off as a sort of outcast trying to get respect, to trying to become a self-made man, where we're really behind him, to this selfish, egocentric jerk. It's really inconsistent. And while there are times you could debate whether or not it's because it's Dreyfuss playing a teenager, it still feels like there should be more focus, which creates some generally choppy storytelling, particularly with the use of transition wipes. However, despite this, I do feel like Dreyfuss did give a pretty good performance in this for how young he was, and I can't really say the film really dragged anywhere, despite the inconsistencies. I give it a B-.
Those transitions were really bad. If you've ever seen Happy Days, it's a similar kind of like cheesy like tile wipe sort of thing.
Blurry fade.
Yeah, blurry fade. I guess they just got a Chiron machine that month at the studio, and they said, hey, let's just edit it with this Duddy Kravitz movie. Because of that, the whole film just seems very, very 70s in execution, and it does not hold up very well. Dreyfuss tries his best here, but he's really not up to his later game. This is right on the heels of American Graffiti as well, which he was great in. But Duddy's an annoying, unlikable character. But he is probably the best part of the movie. So, not that I can get behind his character, but I can at least appreciate that the film is about him. The supporting cast is okay. Jack Warden does a really good job. But it doesn't seem like we get quite enough out of the brother relationship, which Justin mentioned his name, but sort of glossed over the fact that means his name is Lenny Kravitz, which I just couldn't get over. But
oh man, he was his brother's Lenny Kravitz.
Yeah, his brother's Lenny Kravitz. Yeah. But anyway, I could have used a little bit more of their relationship because he's mentioned a lot, but he's only really in like a couple of scenes.
Yeah, he shows up in like the latter half of the movie.
Yeah. So I'm actually right there with you, Justin. I give it a B-. Joe?
I definitely see where you guys are coming from. It's a movie that I think has a lot to say, and it covers a lot of bases, but it doesn't really say enough about anything because it's trying to say too much. So it does seem very unfocused. That editing with the wipe is really annoying. It makes every scene run into the next one so fast that sometimes you got to catch your breath. I do think Dreyfuss does give a pretty good performance here, and I do agree. I think it is kind of an issue that his character does seem inconsistent and maybe even unlikable. I mean, they're exploring these ideas about Machiavellian capitalism and ethnic identity and romance, among a ton of other things, which is very interesting. And I did think that there was kind of a timely atmosphere. I kind of liked the fact that it did feel very grounded in the 70s. Like, it did stand out for that. But it's also a film that's tackling, struggling with a Jewish Canadian way of life, like just struggling in North America overalls. I would argue that this character is complicated. So that's one reason why he seems so unlikable. That's why it didn't bother me quite as much if he is playing somebody that just got out of high school. He's got the image of his big brother to live up to, trying to make his father happy, trying to make the girlfriend happy. We think he hates his uncle, but it turns out he doesn't really hate his uncle. He seems inconsistent, but I think he's a guy really trying to figure out who he is and what he wants. So he doesn't do things that are always nice, but he was always interesting. So I actually think because of that, I'm going to bump it up a little higher. I actually give it a B.
Okay. I really couldn't take his constant annoying laughter either. It was like every time he said or did anything, he had this like weaselly laugh.
But he's a wise guy.
I know,
Yeah,
and
which was a little...
you know, it gets old really fast.
Maybe a little bit.
But
I thought he was kind of enjoyable. He was maybe a little cartoony, but
At times.
yeah, a little bit.
I think that was the character trying to stand out because he felt so inferior in some situations. I feel like every segment of the film felt like an individual story, and I know it's kind of, I guess, transgressing over years in his life, but I felt like we have the beginning where we see him in his neighborhood, and that's really fascinating. That could be one movie. And then you've got him working in the club, you know, kind of dealing with all these rich kids, you know, going, you know, rubbing shoulders with the doctors of the world, and that could be a movie. And then he got his whole weird drug thing with the mobsters, and like,
Yeah.
and then he got, you know, his dealings with his brother and his uncle, and then
It is very episodic.
starting his
Yeah.
business, and then you have, what were they, the pinball machines transported, and then there's
I like that scene. I love pinball.
there's a
I like when they played pinball.
there's a lot going on, and maybe it required a longer film, perhaps, with a little more focus, because it feels like it doesn't take its time enough.
Well, maybe it also, because of that, requires more of a thread throughout, other than Duddy himself.
Yeah,
You know?
it's not quite enough. What is the driving theme here behind
Right,
this?
right.
A bit more from the supporting cast in a way.
Yeah, I thought a lot of the supporting cast was very underutilized.
Mm-hmm.
He's so young here, too. I mean, he aged very fast. What About Bob was only 18 years later, and it seems like he's 55 in that movie.
Yeah, he did age. He looks
know?
unrecognizable in that, pretty much.
Yeah, he did. But all right, so that is going to do it for the show this week. Joe, a lot of things going on with your Merlin channel. The live streams with the news events and stuff. How's that going?
Funny story. For some reason, Google Plus wasn't working, so I couldn't do a live stream last time. But I did kind of go over everything and just did a regular upload.
Okay.
Made it edited, so it was actually a lot shorter, and you got a lot of fast points. So actually, I think it's even better in some ways.
Nice.
But yeah, you know, check out that. There's the Power Rangers movie coming out now. So. You know,
I have not heard about that.
Yeah, it's 2016 is what they're planning for, so it's official.
No kidding.
Yeah, so that's the biggest news for this week. So I'm doing that every Monday and just doing different discussions every Wednesday. So, you know, pretty consistent now. But yeah, always good stuff coming up. And we've got our Sopranos segments coming up. Yeah, you and I
are doing the Sopranos retrospective.
Yep, so that'll be that.
Oh, nice.
That'll be some things coming up in the next couple weeks, hopefully.
All right. And for those of you listening, if you have not subscribed yet to our channel, go ahead and do that here on YouTube. And you can also join the Facebook group, which is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. We post our 5-word reviews there weekly, leading up to that week's episode. And our Twitter feed at Film Fanatics Pod. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye!